Welcome back to the Polaris Energy Finance Podcast, where we bring catalyzing conversations around energy and mining finance directly to early career professionals and students. I'm your host, Terry Rumbold, and today I have a guest who's genuinely special to me, not just as a practitioner, but as someone who really helped to shape how I think about the industry firsthand. Adam Medoff, who has spent over 15 years working at the intersection of clean energy and finance. And really what makes his perspective so rare is that he's done it from both sides of the table. He spent nearly a decade on the investment side at firms like New Island Capital Management, Lacuna Sustainable Investments, and Cypress Renewables, underwriting deals and analyzing projects. Then he made the leap to go to the developer side, founding Mammoth Summit Power in 2024, where he's currently a managing partner, focused on turning early-stage ideas into operating power plants. On top of all of that, Adam is an adjunct professor at Duke University's Nichols School of the Environment, where he teaches a fantastic solar development course. And full disclosure here, I was a student in that class, and that course was one of the things that really made renewable energy development feel real and tangible to me. So having Adam here feels like a full circle moment. Adam, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, man. Good to be here.
Thank you. All right. Before we start talking about renewable energy and your work in development, I'd love to start asking you about what originally pulled you towards clean energy when you were making that decision in your early career, or maybe when you were a student.
Yeah, really good question. I was driven by my mom, actually. So my mom's an environmentalist. She's a old school hippie. She got into environmental law early in her career. And so she spent her life pursuing environmental justice and environmental policy through the nonprofit world. And I've become very passionate about environmental issues because of her. And so I thought maybe I wanted to follow in her footsteps. So in college, I interned at the Environmental Protection Agency under her former boss, a woman named Judith Ank, who was leading Region 2 at the time. And I realized that the policy world, government wasn't for me, but I really liked the mission still of trying to do something good in clean energy and in helping with climate change and other environmental issues. And so I tried to think of what I could do that was still related to kind of solving the climate challenges I saw as a student, but wasn't in the policy world. And so being from San Francisco, there were a lot of startup companies and investors just in the ecosystem. And so I pursued an internship in Clean Tech VC, as it was called at the time, Clean Pacific Ventures, small group, and loved it. Yeah. And so then I applied for some Clean Tech VC internships and early jobs coming out of college, and the rest is history.
Wow. So really starts off with the family and anchoring that into your mission. I resonate with that.
Yeah.
My family is also in the metals and mining business back home in Mongolia, and just growing up, the dinner table conversations would be around that and energy. So I also resonate with that. I was going to ask about when, I guess, renewable energy and finance stopped being like an interesting work and became a mission for you. But I feel like it started out as a mission for you, and then it just found shape as you were going through your professional journey.
Yeah, that's right. It's for me, I've always thought that having positive impact in what I do and work can't be dislodged from the other. My dad's a physician, and so both of my parents are really passionate about what they do, and it's a career for them, but also a calling. And so for me, I've never thought of doing something that I wasn't passionate about. So to me, it starts with the mission of now, putting more clean energy on the grid, or in storage, keeping more clean energy on the grid. And I can't really separate the impact from the work.
We have a lot of listeners who are early in their professional careers and are also students. And you mentioned interning at the EPA and also Clean Tech VC starting out. I guess, what was the moment when you were either at either of those internships or your first career job that really, like, when it all clicked for you? Like, oh, so this is all the puzzle pieces coming together, or like this is how the mechanism works in this industry? Or did that come much later into your career? How did that pan out for you?
Such a good question. I mean, I would say that for me, having a narrative to my career has been really important. I've been able to trace, here's where I've been and here's where I want to go, kind of at every step. I wouldn't say it all really clicked until I got to Cypress Creek. So my first job was with New Island Capital, which was a family office based in the Bay. And we were doing all kinds of impact investing. So we were doing education, technology. We were doing some investing in fund. We were doing microfinance in the developing world. We were doing sustainable agriculture. And I think I went an inch deep on every topic. The thing I liked the most was the clean energy, but I understood it, at a very, very cursory level. And so for me, the next step in my career was to, okay, well, now I want to understand this energy thing more and how that works in the United States, because you could spend your whole career in one very small part of the energy world and still not know everything. And so spending 5% of your time on energy is really hard. So that was when I went to NRG. But even at NRG, I was in a group called Station A, which was the Skunk Works team. And so we were doing, I would say, pretty non-commercial things, fun ideas, but not the real root of the company, which was owning and operating power plants. And so I realized I had a lot more to learn about how to actually develop solar projects in particular. And that was when I went to Cypress Creek. I learned development and investing in solar projects like drinking through a fire hose. I joined in 2017, which was kind of at the peak of phase one Cypress, and we were in every market in the country. And my job was to be the linchpin between development and project finance. And so I was modeling every kind of solar project you can think of and having to talk to the development team about development risks they were taking. And that, to me, was the moment when I thought, wow, it's a really great use of the finance background I have, and I'm learning a ton about energy and how to really apply it to projects and investing in the space. I loved it. Cypress was awesome. We had a really special group of people working there at the time too.
That's amazing. I hear a lot of great things about Cypress as well. And I think that's a nice segue into our next question. As you just described here, you've spent nearly equal time both on the investment side and also on the developer side. So what did working on both sides of the equation teach you about the other?
Well, I think we talked about this in class, and I say it a lot. I think that it's really hard to be a good developer without understanding the investment side of the business. And if you're investing in renewable energy and you don't understand development, you're going to find yourself underwater pretty quickly. So to me, it's all of a piece, and you really have to understand both parts to be successful in the business. So even at Mammoth Summit, I really think of us, we're developing projects, but what we're really doing is we're allocating capital to the best projects we have. So I think of ourselves in some ways still as an investor. Certainly at Cypress Creek, we were a development company, but my job was to help us invest our money into the best projects that we have. So the lens is not wholly different. We spend a lot of time just thinking about how do we minimize risk or maximize our risk-adjusted returns. I will say the speed of things and the risk lens and the risk tolerance changes depending on where you are in the spectrum. So our investors in Mammoth Summit think about risk, slightly differently than we do because they have a different risk return profile than we do as the developer ourselves. So I think it's pretty much the same coin, just depends on which side you're looking at.
For a lot of our listeners who may be a bit unfamiliar with renewable energy finance, especially in 2026.
Sure.
As we just talked about having both the investor and the developer side of perspectives, could you walk our listeners through how a renewable project is typically financed in 2026 and what that might look like for a developer and also for an investor?
Sure. Maybe it'll be helpful to start with how a project goes from an idea to an operating power plant, and then we can talk about how we layer on the investment view on top of that. So most projects start with a piece of land, and I guess before a piece of land, a thesis on why a certain part of the grid or a certain part of the energy market is interesting. And so a developer will try to identify the best land to site their project, be it a solar, battery, or wind project. Once you're able to get control of the site, either through a purchase option or a site option with the landowner, then you start to do what we would call traditional development, which is de-risking the project through its various stages. So you'll focus on getting your interconnection agreement in place, which is the agreement to tie that project to the grid. You'll work on getting all the permits you need, all the environmental studies you'll need, all of the engineering studies and drawings that you'll need, and eventually figure out how to sell your power or sell for a battery, the capacity of the battery. And so once you figured out the revenue of the project, you've gone through all of your project costs, you've gone through all of the permits that you'll need, you have control of the site, you're basically ready to build the project. That the moment you're ready to build your project, we call notice to proceed, or NTP. It's a huge moment in the project lifecycle, and that's really when a project goes from development to construction. Construction on a project is considered pretty low risk at this point. Once you have everything you need to build a project, it's really a question of how long it will take, and that's pretty well known for whatever size project you're working on. Once you get through construction, you hit the final date, which we call either placed in service or commercial operations, so the PIS date or the COD, and that's when your project goes from development to construction to operations. And operations is when you start to generate cash flow off the project and you're operating a real power plant. So the investment window into that project, I would say, follows pretty closely those three different stages. So there's capital that is looking to take development risk and fund projects through development. There's capital that is, specifically for construction, and then there's what I would consider more traditional operating capital. Investors who focus on development, which is what I used to do at Lacuna Sustainable Investments, and really what we did at Cypress Creek, are risk tolerant. So they know that not every project is going to work. In the States, focus on utility scale projects, it's, I think, 5% of projects that apply for interconnection wind up getting built, and not every project applies for interconnection. So you've got to understand that most projects don't work. It's why we tell people don't name projects after things or people that you love, because they mostly die. So if you're going to be a good investor, you need to understand that you can't spend a ton of money on projects that aren't going to work. And so being a good investor in development and being a good developer, allocating capital into development, means being really, really thoughtful about how much money you put into projects at different stages. And so there's a whole community of people who really think a lot about development capital and investing in developers. Once a project is ready to build at NTP, there's a very big world of construction financing, which is, large banks have very traditional construction debt offers, and that's not particularly specialized. It's not hard to conceive of a construction project outside of energy. We do it in real estate all the time, and it's not all of that. It's not all that different, and it's pretty low cost capital because it's low risk. The operating capital stack for a solar or battery project will involve a traditional bank loan. It will also involve, at this point, monetizing tax credits, either through tax equity or a sale of the tax credit transfer. And then traditionally will also involve what we call sponsor equity or common equity. That's just the actual owner of the project. And so those three buckets all have, different capital requirements and different types of investors who step in to fund different parts.
That was a fantastic explanation.
Yeah, maybe more than you wanted.
No, that was perfect. I felt like I was back in the classroom, and it was just as great. I guess with changing administration and policy frameworks, tax credits and tax equity structuring changes. So I was just wondering, in 2026, for a lot of your projects or a lot of the projects that you've seen over the years, how has tax equity played a role in the project returns in real life, and how are developers responding to changing policy frameworks around that?
Yeah. It's been table stakes to have tax equity in project financing since I've been in the industry. So it's never optional to have a monetization of the tax credit. You can do that through traditional tax equity partnerships and investment structures, which would be like a partnership flip, or there's inverted leases. There's a few different ways to structure tax equity. But in order to make solar project economics work, the tax credit's never been optional. So we have viewed it that way historically in the industry. frankly continue to view it that way going forward. On solar projects, the tax credit expires because of the one big bill at the end of June of this year. So if you haven't already started construction on your projects, there's a very limited window to get the tax credit. So it'll be really interesting to see how the industry changes and starts to accommodate the phase out of the tax credit. Frankly, most developers have been planning for that for the last year. And so for the most part, that hasn't become a reality for the industry yet. It is coming soon, and we will see what happens. On the battery side, we have a much longer window to work with tax credits. But yeah, the tax equity and the tax credit monetization is a core part of the project economics at this point.
On the flip side, we have data centers and AI boom, and that's more exciting.
It only took us 10 minutes to get to data centers. All right.
It only took 10 minutes. I tried my best. And obviously, we hear these huge projections that we're going to need crazy amounts of data centers.
Yeah.
And for developers, that must be exciting.
For us at Mammoth Summit, we are selling small batteries to regulated utilities. So for the most part, our customers are not data centers at this point. We have had a few opportunities to talk to data centers and think about behind the meter batteries for them. Nothing's really come to fruition at this point. I think the data center thing, look, if you look at what's happened over the last 2 years in the industry, if there wasn't the AI and data center craze that there is now, the industry would be in a much worse place. Far fewer projects would be getting done, and the impact of the one big bill would feel much more acute than it's being felt now. The whole industry is effectively being propped up by growing energy demand and projections of growing energy demand that we haven't experienced in the regulated power market in the United States for the last 20 years. So it is an enormous driver of growth, and really the backbone of the industry at this point is supporting load growth that we haven't had before. It also makes me very nervous because the projections around the data centers and AI demand feel a lot like the projections around wind, solar, and batteries coming online that you would read in industry reports like 5 years ago, when they would say, the interconnection queue is 3x the size of the U.S. power system. How are we going to interconnect all these projects? And as a developer, I always thought, we're not. Projects are going to drop out. Like, we're not going to add all of these projects. And so when I see the same numbers being reported for data centers, I just say, yeah, well, not all those data centers are going to get built. Like, sure, the industry is producing numbers around planned growth, but like, it's going to drop out. We're not going to have all that planned growth. The reality of connecting those data centers to the grid is that it takes a while. Like, trust me, working with utilities, even if the utilities want to move quickly, they can't. And getting on the power, the water, the permits to get these data centers online is going to take a while, even if you have mega tech companies pouring billions of dollars in. So I'm nervous that we, as the power generation side of the industry, will spin up a lot of projects and pour in a lot of capital to say, hey, we're here to meet all this AI data center growth. And if that growth doesn't come to fruition, you will have a lot of projects effectively abandoned or non-viable in a few years.
I think a lot of the times we're playing catch up, and then eventually if it catches up, either from policy perspective or from market perspective, things could change very quickly.
And it's hard if you're in a market that changes quickly, but you're working on projects that don't move quickly. So it's hard to respond to market conditions that seem to be changing week by week. It takes the very, very, very fastest 3 years to develop a very small power plant. It takes to develop a big power plant, a big solar project takes 6 or 7 years. They can't change it. We can't really plan for market conditions that change on a weekly basis. That is one of the more challenging parts of the industry at this point.
Absolutely. Then how would you hedge against that as a developer?
We're trying to be really thoughtful about which markets we're in and about how we allocate capital to projects. So I think good developers spend a lot of time thinking about how to allocate as little money as they can to create as many options as they can. So we get a lot of site options that are very cheap. And then we try to figure out which ones will work with the utility customers that we're trying to partner with and try to give them a menu of options. And we don't really start pouring money in until we know that a project is going to work or not. And so I think that's how we hedge against this. We try to be thoughtful about the markets that we pick. And then once we're in a market that we like, we try to be really, really careful about how we invest in our portfolio of projects.
Right on. I want to ask, after spending a lot of the time both in investment and developers, what made you want to found your own firm, and what led you to that?
I don't think I'm one of those people who always dreamed of being an entrepreneur, someone who started their own company. I was very happy working at Cypress and other places, working for other people who I really liked and respected. I think what really drove me to the developer side and then to start Mammoth was wanting to have a little bit more control over the decisions being made for the companies I was working for. I just kept feeling like I wished if we were going to make mistakes, that they're mistakes that I would have picked instead of mistakes other people picked. And that was what drove me to want to start my own company. And we decided to launch Mammoth Summit because we saw an opportunity in the market and couldn't find another developer to invest in. So I saw this opportunity when I was at Lacuna to develop these small batteries in the Pacific Northwest, and tried to find a developer that we could invest in to go develop those batteries, and couldn't find anybody. So I thought, well, maybe it's time to go try to start something, and then talk to my two partners, Ben and Bob, each individually about trying to work on this together. And then we went to go raise capital around the idea. But it was never, it hasn't been a lifelong dream, but it's been very fulfilling and rewarding. We've certainly made our mistakes, but it is nice to make mistakes on our own rather than have other people make mistakes on our behalf.
What attracted you to those technologies early on? And specifically, you said Pacific Northwest. What led you to that market? And then also your eventual expansion across the U.S. and now in North Carolina as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, we have, I've been focusing on batteries in my career since 2015 when I was at NRG. So part of the Skunkworks team, Station A at NRG, we were tasked with first microgrids and then figuring out how to do solar plus storage. So I think we were one of the first teams at NRG really thinking about how to pair solar and storage together. And so when I went to Cypress, worked on batteries a bit there. So for me, batteries don't feel all that new. On a standalone basis, they are newish in the United States. We did do some standalone batteries in PJM. They were doing 2-hour ancillary service applications back in the early 2010s, but really the growth you're seeing now is the result of dropping lithium-ion prices, obviously, and more solar coming online, which drives the need for more batteries. But for me, this feels like a pretty logical extension of where the market's gone. I think the thing that does feel new is we've had a lot of batteries in Texas and California participating in wholesale markets where there's a very clear price signal. And what we're starting to see more and more are utilities saying, hey, we could actually use batteries on the distribution system to provide reliability services, as well as providing some of the energy shifting and arbitrage opportunities. And that is a space that's pretty new. That's developed in the last few years. The Pacific Northwest was really just one utility up there saying through their IRPs, their rate cases, saying that they wanted some distribution level storage. And just reading through the IRP documents, I saw that and thought, wow, that's really interesting. I haven't heard of anybody doing batteries in the Pacific Northwest, and certainly not on the distribution scale. So that was why we picked that market. We just didn't think there were a lot of other people doing it, which I think we were more or less right about. We've seen one or two other groups, but it's a pretty small market, so it's well addressed by a small team. The other markets that we're thinking in across the country is just we're trying to be in similar places where a 3-person team can be really competitive. So we don't want to be in the largest markets like New York or Texas, where there's a lot of competition and the best sites are already gone. We want to find places where our size is more of a competitive advantage than a disadvantage.
So do you think the first mover advantage window is still open, or can we even call it a first mover advantage at this point?
In the market that we're in, we just submitted 30 projects to a utility solicitation where we think they're likely to pick 5 to 10. So I think we have really good sites. So I think, and there's one or two other competitors that also have great sites. So I think there's not a lot of first mover advantage left in that market, but there will be more and more markets opening up, and there's plenty of places to be a first mover. But it is dependent on the utilities, the utility commissions. Opening up new markets is always a timing challenge more than anything, because you have to follow state legislation, you have to follow utility rate cases, and even if a utility says, I want to put this program together next year, getting it through a commission, getting all the studies done, et cetera, can take quite a while.
I think compared to solar, which you get your power purchase agreement or you have your merchant exposure, battery revenue streams just seem so exciting to me, because there's a lot of things they can do with it that you, as you mentioned earlier, when you're like modeling project finance, how do you incorporate those different revenue streams, and how much weight do you give to each, and how does that inform the return of the project for the sponsor?
Oh boy, good question. So our first projects are really easy to model because they're full toll agreements. And so there's no merchant exposure, and it's a pretty simple revenue stream, to be honest. It looks more like a lease. There's not even a production profile like in solar. There's just a pretty steady revenue stream based on availability of the battery. Mm-hmm. For markets like Texas or New York or California, where you have more wholesale market exposure, you have to run an optimization engine against wholesale market prices. That's really hard to do in Excel, where most of the modeling is done. Mm-hmm. It can be done, but you're going to have some really slow Excel models, I promise. So the best way to do that is to work with a software provider, or people often use groups like Ascend Analytics. There are others. To help you forecast and model battery optimization against future market conditions. And then that becomes the revenue line that you basically just stick into your model, and then everything else runs, pretty normally. But it's a dangerous world in terms of that kind of project modeling, because people will try to do things like, well, what if I do a haircut on energy prices in the future? Well, if you change anything about the market conditions, then you would change the way the battery operates, and then that will actually change the operating costs in your model, because you'd be running the battery differently. Mm-hmm. That'll change your degradation, your battery augmentation schedule. So it's a much more complicated modeling exercise than solar, at least from a battery operations perspective. I think a lot of people don't quite get it right. And I do think quickly we get to a place where Excel is like a very limited tool in terms of all of the analysis you need to do.
I was curious to ask you how at Mammoth you're integrating AI into your operations and how that's changing your models and everything.
Look, at the end of the day, our job as a developer is to find pieces of land and to get them to a place where they're ready to be turned into battery projects, and then sell them to somebody who's going to build, own, and operate them. So we're not a software company. So for us, AI has to, in whatever way we use it, has to contribute to making ourselves more efficient in our core business, which is developing battery projects. It's really tempting to want to spend a lot of time on fancy tools, on software, because it's fun. It's a lot easier than going to like a local permitting meeting and trying to convince people to permit a battery. So I think there is it's kind of a shiny, fun object. The answer is that right now, we're not using a ton of AI. I think we are using it for some research. We're using it for summarizing. You can spend a lot of time reading utility documentation. Mm-hmm. You can spend a lot of time going through very, very long legal contracts. I use it as a way to get up to speed quickly. And then with any legal agreement, you still got to go in and read it yourself. But AI can be a helpful tool for summarizing. I mentioned this to you before we started, but during my recent paternity leave, did start playing with Claude Code and coming up with some of our own tools using Claude, and I'm completely blown away. Mm-hmm. So it's very impressive, and I think we're just at the very beginnings of figuring out what we can do with writing some of our own code to make our operations more efficient. I don't know how we will wind up incorporating it in the long run, but in the short to medium term, there do seem to be a few ways to take the data that we have on specific projects or data that we have on land or permitting, zoning, things like that, and use the AI to make more informed decisions about which projects to pursue, which projects maybe we should drop, to track our spending in a more thoughtful way. So, yeah.
Right on. The very, very thoughtful answer, Adam.
We're trying. It's hard. There's so much out there. There's so many companies now that offer, AI-driven solutions. It's exciting. We'll see. I think really the goal for us is how much can we do with a 3-person team that used to need a 20 or 30-person team to do. That will really be the barometer of success for us in AI implementation.
Absolutely. I think even for our student and early career professionals listening to the podcast today, just learning AI and learning how to use it to be more efficient is maybe the first step.
Yeah, as I think about it as a student, and we have an intern working for us at Mammoth Summit who also came from class at Duke. And what I told him was that I think to get into the industry, my whole career, table stakes has been, do you know how to use Microsoft Office programs? Can you use Excel, PowerPoint, Word? Can you use them really well? Early in my finance career, someone would take my mouse away, so you had to learn how to do Excel with only shortcuts and stuff. Yeah. Like that used to be that at one time was the bellwether of the industry of basic skills to be a professional. I think that's probably not going to be true anymore. I think the new basic skill will be how much can you code yourself as a non-technical person? And maybe there won't even be a difference between technical and non-technical because the AI is so good at writing its own code at this point that instead of building a project finance model in Excel, you should be building a project finance model using a Python script that AI gave to you. And then the question is can you figure out if the AI is right? It won't check that it's right necessarily. So you need to be able to check that it's right, but you can do that in 5 minutes, whereas it used to take you a week to build a really good project finance model.
What a great insight. Folks, you heard it here first in Polaris Energy Finance Podcast from Adam.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, that's really cool. I guess I wanted to ask you about coming into a project from a sponsor perspective, and especially you spend time underwriting projects and financing it. How did your perspective on capital and risk change once you were raising equity and thinking about leverage from the sponsor side and not just underwriting it?
Sure. I mean, look, at Cypress, we would hold projects and we would also sell them. So we thought about things both as sponsor and as developer who would sell it. I think the answer is a good developer who's going to sell projects should always be thinking like they're a sponsor. So even though we at Mammoth Summit are not going to hold these projects long term, we won't be the owner operator. We want to sell projects to, first of all, we want to sell them to groups that are going to do a good job owning and operating them because it still winds up being our reputation on the line to a certain extent. And we don't get paid until projects are fully built. So it's important to have someone who can actually do that well. And also, we want to be a really good steward in the communities that we're in. We're asking, local permitting officials to trust us when we say that we're taking all the right steps in terms of the studies that we're going through and making sure the batteries are fire tested and that we're working with local fire departments. And if we turn it over to an owner operator who doesn't wind up following through on those promises, it looks bad on us. So it's really, really important that we as developers are very cognizant of what the risks are for an owner, and that we treat the projects like we're going to own and operate them in the long term, even if we won't. I would say that the real difference is that we don't really have to worry about the financing. We don't have to worry about doing the financing ourselves. And so we don't spend as much time thinking about how are we going to go get tax credit insurance, or do we have the longest list of debt providers? Like if I go to a construction perm lender and say, hey, I got these great projects. The first thing they're going to say is, that's great. So are you going to be the one who owns and operates them? And if I say no, then they're going to say, well, I need to talk to the person who's going to actually do that. So it's really for us is a question of where do we focus our time and attention? And it just right now is not on the full financing of the project. But I think that being really good at owning and operating projects is a skill that's often overlooked by developers. They usually think of operations or asset management as a line item in a model.
Yeah.
There's a lot of skill. It's actually really hard. I was talking to somebody yesterday at a energy drinks event who was talking about on old solar projects in North Carolina, there are people who've been coming in and stealing wire off the projects, and they just come in, like hop the fence, cut the wire, and take it.
Oh, wow.
Not something that most people have in their model. How do you solve that?
Yeah.
Right. So those are questions that people who are being sponsor equity and need to own the projects need to think about and have a thoughtful answer on. For me, first of all, we're not doing much solar, so we haven't thought as much about people stealing wires, but there are like nuances in terms of operations that for us are less important at this stage, that we spend less time thinking about.
So what assumptions actually make or break the investment case in standalone battery storage projects? And then which of those do you think the market is still mispricing to this day?
I mean, for the batteries we're working on, so I think the thing that people need to understand that they're always going to get wrong is like a model is inherently wrong. Mm-hmm. I've never seen a quote unquote correct model. Mm-hmm. And so modeling really should be an exercise not in getting to the right answer, but in getting to the right questions. And so the right questions are the ones that lead you to understand project economics and project risks in a more nuanced way. Mm-hmm. And so especially in development, especially when we're doing such early stage projects, our models are very wrong, as are everyone's. They're just not possible to make them right. Mm-hmm. I think that the risks that people often underprice or misunderstand are probably twofold. So one is merchant revenue, mm-hmm. and then the second is operating costs and operating expenses. I guess same thing. So on the merchant side, a lot of folks have commented on this in the battery space, so I'm not saying anything new. I don't understand how people get comfortable with like 20 years of ancillary service revenue forecasts or energy arbitrage of 20 years of forecasts. And the answer is, I think everyone realizes that it's really hard to model those revenues for 20 years. And so the way you account for that is you put enough fluff in the model or enough padding in the model that even if you're wrong by 10 or 20%, you're still comfortable with where your returns are. And so you price the uncertainty with higher returns is effectively the way you do it, which is why for our projects, we actually don't have a lot of revenue uncertainty. We don't have a lot of merchant exposure. And so the cost of capital theoretically on those projects should be lower. We'll see if that bears out in the market, but based on fundamentals, that should be true. And then on the operating cost side, I think it behooves people to spend a lot of time thinking about what actual operating performance of certain types of assets has been. So if you look at a solar project and you're modeling, 50 basis points of degradation year over year, you should look to see how those panels or how actual solar projects degrade in terms of performance year over year. It's generally more than 50 basis points. And so there are groups like KWH Analytics that have done a lot of work on actually understanding what the operating performance risk on projects is. I'm guessing that the industry, and having not been on the buy side in a while, I can't say for sure, but I'm guessing that people are more thoughtful than they used to be. But in early days, before there was a lot of performance data, I think people overlooked that risk considerably. On the battery side, I think we're early in the terms of operating performance data. Just there aren't that many batteries on the grid yet.
So we're going to have to learn.
We will be learning in the next few years, and then I'm sure we'll be updating our models and pricing.
Really, really exciting. And I'm looking forward to keeping up on that.
Yeah, we'll see.
So I took your solar development class at Duke, and I've been your student. You've been a great, great, great professor. For those students listening who are at Duke next year, will you be teaching the course again?
Yeah, we're planning to run it back in the fall. And it's actually open to some UNC students as well. So.
Oh, okay. That's amazing.
Come take it.
Good to know. Good to know. So having been your student, I want to ask you, what skill do you think matter most for someone who wants to work in renewable energy space or in renewable energy finance over the next decade, really thinking long term or also medium and short term as well?
I feel like I'm going to give you just a very, it seemed maybe a bit of a platitude, but curiosity. Mm-hmm. I mean, truly being curious and having a lot of hustle and being willing to learn, is going to be has been for me the most important thing in the industry, and I'm guessing will continue to be the most important thing. I wouldn't have guessed that we would be where we are today 5 years ago. I have no idea where we'll be in another 5 years. And so the most important thing as a practitioner of being a developer or even being an investor is to spend a lot of time trying to understand where the market is and where the market's going to go. And to do that, you just have to be very curious. It helps to really like energy. I happen to have fallen in love with the industry. I read a lot of I have a large collection of books on the history of the energy industry because I think it's really interesting. So try to understand where we've come from. So understand the beginnings of the American electric power industry, starting with Edison and going into Sam Insull, and some of the early foundations will help you kind of get a sense of where we're going to go. But yeah, just be curious because, the AI data center thing is the flavor of the month. Who knows what it's going to look like in 3 or 4 years? But I would have told you a couple of years ago the most important thing is to learn how to build a financial model in Excel. And I think I just told you that I don't think you need to know how to do that anymore. So it's hard to say when the industry changes so quickly over time. So I think curiosity is a lasting skill, or at least a lasting trait that will always serve people really well.
That's awesome. Stay curious, folks. Looking forward, what part of the clean energy value chain are you most excited about right now? And putting all the pieces together, the policy, the markets, capital, financing, what do you think renewable energy finance will be grappling the most with in 2026?
I'll answer those. I think there's two questions there. I think one is what I'm most excited about, and then one, what is the industry going to be grappling with this year? So I'm really excited about distribution connected batteries. That's why we're doing it at Mammoth Summit. I think we like the speed at which we can connect projects. So it takes us we're far faster on getting through interconnection queues than large scale utility scale batteries. It takes far less capital to do it, so we can be much more efficient with a small team. We can turn projects pretty quickly. There's a lot of land where you can put a 5 megawatt battery. You can't put a 100 megawatt battery there. So for us, we like the niche that we've carved out. It's hard for a lot of people to do because the numbers are small, so you need a very small team. So we really like that space, and we're excited for some of the new markets we're getting into this year and seeing how far we can take this small team in developing these kinds of projects. In terms of what the industry is going to be grappling with in 2026, it's going to be a lot of tax credit things. So we're going to be wrestling on the solar side with the phase out of the ITC. And on the storage side, you probably won't stop hearing the word FIOC or the acronym FIOC for the next few years. So for any of the students curious, learn more about foreign entities of concern and how that's made the storage industry and the supply chain much more challenging. So those will be the things that we're all focused on. And I think the medium term is going to be, permitting and how we as developers can be good partners to the communities where we want to bring these projects. There's a lot of fear about putting lithium-ion batteries in the ground, understandably so. But if you look at the data, if you look at the expert reports, if you look at the way the new technology is handling, fire safety specifically, I think we can get people comfortable that these are, not only can these be safe forms of infrastructure in their community, but they can also really help benefit local ratepayers in terms of contributing to the tax base, in terms of bringing some local jobs. And so, but that is a question we need to answer. I was just in West Virginia with my family, catching some last weeks of skiing, and we kept seeing signs that said no power plant, no data center. And there was a proposed data center in the county we were in that was going to have a new power plant to power it, and people were really scared of it. And they have a beautiful, scenery they don't want disrupted, and they don't really fully understand the benefits that they would see. And so I think we as developers and as new entrants into these communities have the responsibility to explain why we think we would be good partners and how we can help people.
Oh, great insights, Adam. I feel like only someone like you who has such breadth of experience can give such a nuanced and dynamic answer to this question.
I'm sure there's plenty of people who give much better answers.
It's been a fantastic podcast, Adam. I learned so much today, and I'm sure our listeners did as well. I always like to ask this at the end. Who's someone doing really thoughtful work in energy finance that you think would be a great next guest?
Who's doing really thoughtful work on energy? I mean, I would give two names. So one, former colleague of mine over at Segway Sustainable Infrastructure, Dave Reister. They're really thoughtful in terms of allocating development capital, and Dave is a great person. He would be awesome to have on the podcast. He's really thoughtful about how they allocate capital to projects and how they think about development risk. I think they're definitely a leader in this space. The other name that I'll throw out quickly is some of my co-founders at Mammoth Summit. So I think it'd be fun to talk to Ben or Bob, Ben Luxembourg, Bob Cook. So Bob is actually a very new entrant to the renewable energy space. He was a college teammate of mine back in the day, and then spent time doing Moneyball and front offices of professional baseball. And then he spent time doing data analytics, and then he was in the Peace Corps. So he's had a really interesting background, and then went to grad school. And immediately after grad school, he helped start Mammoth Summit. So I'd be really curious to get his perspective, because he's really new to the space, and probably for your students is like very close to where they were in like their career progression, but also has jumped into the deep end and like become a very good developer in his own right in the last few years. And then Ben Luxembourg has been, an exceptional developer of large scale projects in the West and now across the country. And he has a really fascinating background too. So both of them would be, really good guests to have on. Just a plug for my own company. No bias here.
Adam, thank you so much for your time. Would it be okay if I share your maybe LinkedIn with our listeners if they want to stay connected, or maybe like check out the company website?
Absolutely. Yeah. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn and reach out. Feel free to check our company website. I don't have social media. I'm pretty sure we don't have social media as a company. So yeah, LinkedIn or info@mammothsummit.com. Feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was Polaris Energy Finance Podcast. We'll see you in our next episode.